Welcome to the May 28th, 2024 City Council Work Session. I'd now like to turn it over to City Manager Benda to walk us through the agenda overview.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday weekend, and we give thanks for all those who have served our country. Today, under the work session items, we have enterprise traffic update. Our Vice Mayor has worked with city staff about this update. This is kind of a follow-up on to some efforts that we put forward, and we have public works staff here to kind of engage you on that. And then also Dr. Holly Jennings is here again. Last year, kind of almost contemporaneous with the curfew conversation, we looked at all the things that we do here in the city and thinking from Memorial Day through to Labor Day, what are the things that our young people can become involved with that maybe are city-led or city sponsored. And so we created a resource that we push out wide and far so as to ensure that as of last Friday, that was the last day of school for Lynchburg City Schools. I know that because my youngest is becoming a sophomore. Yay for Kennedy Jane. Yeah, there we go. And so we're just making sure that parents and loved ones know what we have to offer young people this summer in the city. So Dr. Jennings will engage you on that. And remember, business item briefings are those briefings that we come ahead of a vote. Our job, our opportunity is to help engage you about a topic that maybe you've raised or that we need to talk about with you, to answer the question so that you feel comfortable once it is positioned for a vote, that you're ready for that. And so, Mayor, before I turn it back to you, if it's okay, one of the things that we've done in this fiscal 2025 budget was to propose an opportunity, a project called the Downtown Branch Library. And so I have Beverly Blair here, who's going to talk to you about this pilot project where we're going to take the resource that we own at 12th and Church, that used to be the tourism center, and use that and create it as a downtown library. So it'll be another arrow in our quiver this summer for young people and other people to kind of consider as they think about getting engaged and or getting educated or maybe getting a book or a movie that they've wanted. So with that, I'll turn it to Beverly Blair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Winter. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of City Council. I am thrilled to be before you this afternoon to share the most exciting news that our newest branch library is set to open next week. Nestled in the heart of our community, what we really feel is the hub of activity downtown, right next to our great community market. This modern space is located in the former visitor center. It's super bright, so much great natural light. It's an inviting library that is filled with bestsellers, trending titles, a dedicated children's section. Imagine mobile furniture, everything's on wheels. We can quickly move things out to transform the space to fit any event. There will be an art wall showcasing local talent by our local artist, Elizabeth Gray, that I'm super excited about. And we're not just bringing books, we're bringing the community together with innovative programs. We have Saturday story time at the market planned, morning chess, Friday story times, First Friday events, teen activities, and a unique silent book club for adults. This library will be a dynamic hub right downtown where during a 6-month pilot, we are going to reconnect with our citizens, we're going to gather insights, and we're going to experiment with different ideas and schedules. I hope you will join us on Saturday, June 8th for our grand opening from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. We look forward to making this new space the cornerstone of our community's vibrant future. And that's all I had.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much. Oh, yes. Go.
The library downstairs?
Yes, sir, we do. The opportunity here is, when we were thinking about the renovation, we were going to have to close that portion of our library system for a minute while we repurpose some materials. And during all that, this new idea came out. And so in looking at volume, data, and numbers, we thought, let's push ourselves a little bit, use the existing space that we have. So for this interim period, the 6 months, while we look at the resource that we have, that will not be open. We'll point traffic to the one that's on the corner at. But yes, we currently do have our downtown, or at least our City Hall library. We'll call it City Hall Branch Library that's in just below us. You're welcome.
Any other questions? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Moving on to our work session agenda items, the Enterprise Drive traffic update. Mr. Lee Newland.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Enterprise Drive and what we have done out there. For a little bit of history to start with, back in April of 2023, brought a traffic study to y'all and presented that. And then back in May, council decided to change the code and put up some increased speeding fine signs on Enterprise Drive. So then the staff, we ordered 4 radar feedback signs and had them installed by late September. I can do that.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, I was going to help you.
Yeah, I forgot about that. My bad, sorry. Yes, okay. So in September, we installed the data signs and started recording some data on what was going on out there on Enterprise Drive. So currently, there are 2 locations for the radar feedback signs in both directions. They're on both ends and in both directions. And we've been monitoring the data for about 7 months, which they've been in place. The data mining that we have taken from them have given us several bits of information. Here's a chart that starts out, the leftmost column is the locations of the signs. Then we start with the dates back in October and November of 22. That's when Clark Nixon did the traffic study out there. The average speeds on both ends of the of Enterprise Drive were around 40 miles an hour. One was slightly lower at 39. The first month after we put up the signs, the average speed dropped considerably, up to 3 miles an hour on one location. After the 5th month, the speeds have started increasing a little bit. The 6 months, they've gone up a little bit more, and after the 8th month, they're kind of leveling off. So this is a chart to look at a little bit differently. The blue lines are for the first month that they were out there, and these are per day of the week. Monday's on the left and Sunday's on the right, and then the orange is for the 7th month that they were out there. LPD, which is here if they need to answer anything, they did their study out there. When I say study, they did enforcement out there, and they've got some information here. If you have questions about that, I'd let them answer that one. The trends, what are we seeing out there? Like I said earlier, the speeds were reduced during the first month when the feedback signs were new to the motorists. Speeds have gradually gone back up as motorists have become aware and more familiar with the signs. And the speeds tend to be higher entering Windhurst area. So if you're coming in from 221, they're higher at that end coming into Windhurst, and when you're leaving it, they're a little bit lower, and the same thing's happening from the Laxton end. Coming into Windhurst, they're higher than they are leaving Windhurst. So conclusions, roughly 50% of the motorists are within 5 miles an hour of the speed limit, and additional enforcement may reduce speeds for the outliers traveling over the 45 miles an hour speed that ignore the signage. And that's all I've got. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. And
Okay.
like I said, PD is here if need be.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Feraldi?
Thank you for this report. Can we go back
Yep,
one slide, I believe? So
that one.
data is interesting in the variety of directions you can go. By your first bullet point, it says 50% of motorists are within the 5 mile an hour speed limit. Logically, that would indicate that 50% are not within the 5 mile an hour speed limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, this is over, so slightly under 50,
Okay.
yes.
So and can you say that one more time just so I make sure I'm asking my question properly?
Yeah, so this says over 50% of the motors are within 5, so it would be under 50% would be over 5.
Do we have an understanding if within the 5 mile per hour applies to going more than 35 miles an hour or below?
This data is how many people are traveling over the 35.
Okay, so I would love to know then, of that, I'll say 45% that are over 5 miles an hour, what breakdown are those speeds, if we can see those in chunks? Second to that, the second point, additional enforcement may reduce speeds for outliers traveling over 45 miles an hour that ignore the signage. And this was one of the points that I wanted to address too. These signs are very effective. It has become a game to some because they've figured out that if you go over 45 miles an hour, 10 miles an hour over the speed limit, the speed you're going, the rate of speed is not indicated. It just flashes white. And so, mainly yes, because I do see the traffic there often. I see regular vehicles on a consistent basis, the same ones, seeing if they can crack that speed and get over it. So that is one concern I have. Can we adjust those to show the speed limit or the rate of speed that someone is going if it's beyond 45 miles an hour? Because it's multiple times a day.
Yes, if I can address that.
Sure.
So the speed limit signs have the ability to read the signs, and we've got set at 50 since a comment, okay? We've changed the signs so when they go over 50, the speed is not shown, but it says slow down in red. We changed that back on Thursday, the 23rd.
So I've missed it. Thank you, though.
So we don't want people to go, we don't want to show the speeds going greater than 50 because, yes, we feel it'd be a game. How high can we get it to read?
Fair.
So,
But thank you for addressing that already. Regarding the enforcement numbers, can we go back to that slide if you don't mind? It's hard to read for potentially those at home, but what I'm looking at here is the breakdown between a full calendar year and maybe just about half of a year, maybe 3/4 of a year, something in that range. 41 summons issued, 17 traffic crashes, and then for the far right-hand column, it says 29 summons issued, 8 crashes in total. Now, I'm not an attorney, though I have some experience in legal conversations. How many tickets did we issue that were actually cited?
I'll have to turn that over to
because summons issued is different than actually cracking down and making people pay for breaking the law.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. So the 29 is the number of tickets. A summons is a, Virginia uniform summons is a ticket. So that is the number of tickets that have been issued
Okay.
in that area during that time period.
Okay. So are we seeing an uptick then in the last few months since these signs have been enforced and the ordinance changed for how many people we are pulling over?
So you can see that, a lot of this, I'll just tell you, is our availability to get out there and actually do it, right? So there's certainly, if you look at the comparison period, which was 9/20 of 2022 through 5/19 of 23, versus the same time frame a year later since we installed the signs to now, or 9 days ago, I guess, we've seen, almost a tripling of the number of tickets issued in that area. And at the same time, we've seen the accidents almost halved.
Good.
So I would say those two numbers are both going in the correct direction.
I knew the answer was yes. I just wanted to hear it phrased differently, but thank
Yes.
you. I would, as you know, Chief and Mr. Manager, I would continue to ask us to have diligence with these numbers. Just last week, there was a pretty bad T-bone on Enterprise because someone was going too fast. The summit is looking to expand their residents. It's a growing community, Windhurst is. But you can't get into Windhurst without going through two different counties. It's our responsibility. It's the city's responsibility. And this is a very important component to the traffic flow, but also the livelihood of those who live and have their businesses in Windhurst. It's with that in mind, though, with this expansion, and I've asked our city staff as of last week to look into this, the summit is expanding their villas. And with that, they have closed off the entrance to Grand Summit Drive, meaning the only way out of the entire summit development. And Chief, I don't know if this applies to you or not, so if it doesn't, feel free to sit down if you'd like. Thank you. Grand Summit Drive closing down, there's only one way out of the summit, and it's a two-way stop on a 4-lane road where traffic and speeding has been an issue. And no person, elderly or not, would want to take a left-hand turn out of Thistle from the summit and try to go down Enterprise Drive. So with that in mind, could we speak to a little bit what about our conversations were and what we're looking to do to address that?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor, for kind of bringing that to our attention. I know that they had reached out to city staff about their impending construction. The road that you speak of is a private one that they control themselves. The good news here is that staff working through Greg and others, I think, have a meeting as early as, I don't want to speak for.
The meeting's not scheduled yet, but we've
We've
made
had
contact
conversations
on
with them
Friday
about.
and earlier today.
Right. So I think that there's a solution to be had, one that I think benefits their growth and also the availability or the congestion or density that would be increased if you were to close one of those two areas. The hope would be that their signalized intersection would be the one that they would leave open, considering it's already there. The other opportunity at the other end is a little less able because there's not a signal there, but don't want to be prescriptive for them. They know best how, and I know that Gaynell, who's our Public Works Director for a good long while, has much experience in getting to a good solution for everyone in this circumstance. And so the great news is that we're aware of it. They've proposed something I think that we can work with, and we'll make sure that the summit has been a very cool component for us. It's a great community that they're expanding, shows that it's successful. And so in that, we want to make sure that we're meeting them and talking through a best way in which that we all can grow together.
Yeah, well, I gave my word to the, I believe he's the president, but the leader of the residency council. They want a stoplight. They want a stoplight at Thistle and Enterprise. And I do tend to agree with them. I do understand and recognize the traffic study and the design of the road at one time may have been to be a thoroughfare and not more of a residential business corridor. But given the amount of traffic and the rate of speed, the increase in enforcement, the intentionality we've had as a city to ensure the traffic is going here proper, that we should have a 4-way stop at that intersection.
I hear you.
in the future.
I hear you on it, and I hope in the immediate, we can get the construction going, and there's some kind of palpable or meaningful way in which we can do so. I do think you bring up a good point about history, and Lee knows this better, way better than I do. But that thoroughfare, I'll call it, was built well before anything that was around it. The state, Virginia Department of Transportation, if I'm not incorrect, built that. And so it was something that when it was first built, contemplate all the awesome growth that went around it. And so now we have this bikeable, walkable, livable community that we want to flourish. And we have basically a 4-lane highway that connects 2 counties. And people, ride in and out. And so we've contemplated piloting something to look at, slowing down and or, dare I say, a road diet to consider how it would work. But that also then has other implications for like Oddfellows, because part of the reason why it was created was to take, or in Graves Mill? Oh, so Oddfellows on my head because we visited the new police headquarters, so that was in my head. Graves Mill Road. So I hear you, and we'll absolutely come back and give you an update. In the short term, we're just going to try to make sure that the summit can move forward with construction in a way that is safe for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Thank you, Lee. And those would be the questions I have at this moment, unless any of my colleagues have it.
Any other questions? Councilman Helgeson?
If you can back up, that Enterprise Drive slide that you had, it looks like before looking at this, the average speed was 40. That's back in 2022.
Correct.
Now looking forward after 8 months, the average speed's 39. I mean, I recognize averages, and so, I mean, your average is what you can you're looking for, and obviously there's outliers everywhere, and I think the chief would say that there's outliers every street in the city of Lynchburg. I mean, there's outliers in 29, there's outliers on 460, there's outliers on Ford Avenue and Timberlake, and, some that are 35 miles an hour, and, so to me, this looks like it's kind of done its course. Am I not looking at this right? When you looked at it at the beginning, it was 40 miles an hour average speed. After 8 months of signs up and monitoring and more enforcement, you're at 39, which you said was just, the standard deviation, not much over and above the speed limit, which is 35 there, right?
Speed limit is 35, yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, thank you so much. All right, next, Summer Fun and Safety Guide for the Youth of the City, Dr. Holly Jennings.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council, I'm so excited to be able to come before you tonight with this exciting opportunity for our young people this summer. School is out. I remember being that age and thinking, yay. So we wanted to make sure that second year in a row, we provided a resource for parents and young people to know what we as the city have to offer for kids to do in the summer. Now, this is not an all-inclusive resource for what is offered everywhere in Lynchburg, because as you know, churches, nonprofits, private organizations also have camps and lots of things going on, and we encourage parents to get out there and explore all of the options, but we just wanted to make sure that our resources were known as well, all in kind of one place. So this is a companion guide to what the Parks and Recreation Department puts out every summer. If you have not received in the mail, they do an activity guide. The way this is different from the activity guide is everything that anyone in the city can participate in. This is specific to young people, so that's how it's different. We wanted one really easy place for parents to go to see what they can get their kiddos involved in. As Winter already pointed out, he did an excellent job introducing this. This is pro-social activities that kiddos can involve themselves in instead of doing the things that we don't want them to be doing in the summertime. I'm really excited about a couple of things. I keep hearing about basketball. I know the mayor has shepherded in some midnight basketball activities that are coming. I know that folks are super excited about that. And we are also doing the Hill City Hoops at nighttime. Young people are super excited about that. It might be because we're in the middle of NBA playoffs right now that I'm hearing a lot about basketball. But the city is very excited about that. And I even am hearing grown people talk about how the city used to do this back in the day. In fact, I was talking to a barber friend of mine the other day, and he said, you know, we used to go out of the city to other places and would see, when he was a teenager, and see these cities that had lights on their basketball courts. And we just think, man, we need to have that in our city. And now we have lights on our basketball courts, and instead of kids doing other things, they're playing basketball on Friday and Saturday night, which is super exciting. This is broken down into 4 sections: safety, education, recreation, and food, like it was last year, so people can just skip right to the things that they want to look for. And I'm just going to point out 2 pages because you guys have a copy of it. This has been posted on our website and all of our social media sites. It has also been shared by the schools with all of the families in the school division. We also have printed copies in our Citizens First desk for those that cannot access social media or don't have access to the internet. They can come to City Hall and get a printed copy. But the 2 things I kind of wanted to point out, one, I always want to make sure folks know where kids can get food in the summertime while kids are not in school. We have every place that food is being offered for young people right here along with everything else. And then the other thing that's new this year is we have some summer safety tips from LPD that they shared with us. So I encourage parents and young people to check that out as well, to make sure that we're staying safe this summer. That is pretty much all I have for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Councilman Helgeson?
Just one comment. I just, you're talking about a lot about basketball, and I remembered, got a picture of it just recently from a few years back during COVID. Some of the saddest things I've ever seen was Parks and Rec put boards on basketball hoops so a kid couldn't go out there and play basketball and shoot baskets by himself even, because that was the way that they shut this down, basketball hoops, due to COVID, for saying, oh, don't be around other people or whatnot. They had the boards on top of the basketball hoop, the board on top, the board on bottom, bolts going through there. And it was like, why would we go to such extreme to just, take the red off of somebody's candy cane and say, nope, you ain't gonna have fun. So hopefully that'll never happen again. That was some of the most rotten things I've ever seen. And now we're saying, hey, kids, get out and play basketball and go have fun and lights and whatnot. I hope we don't forget the rottenness that was done just recently.
Dr. Wilder?
Yes, thank you for the information. I think it's so important to have stuff like this. You always say what you can't do, so here's some prevention measures. So I was saying, do this, do that, not because, hey, here's the things you can do. So it's a positive thing, especially with the food, because sometimes when school is not in, kids go hungry, so to have so many sources. This is a sample, I know Jubilee is also one, but just as a sample of where a person can go to get free food during the summertime. I really appreciate it, and I love these safety tips. That's really nice to have. We can share with other people as well. Persons always ask us for information. So this is very helpful. I really appreciate it. And as far as during the time when they shut them down, I guess it was more so for safety reasons, not to be rotten, but just for safety reasons and peculiar so we can save children's lives. And this always takes precedence over anything else because we don't want our children to be killed or get any kind of diseases. So I'm sure there's reasons why they did things of that nature. But again, this is very helpful information. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Councilman Mitchins?
So let's all go live in a bubble, right? Where nobody can interact with us, breathe on us, sneeze on us, cough on us. Let's go live on a bubble. Let's all go live in a bubble, individual bubbles, right? Listening to what Councilman Helgeson said, I remember that crystal clear, and I couldn't be more disappointed in our city at that time. Biggest mistakes that we've made in this city in my lifetime were under the leadership that shut down our schools, shut down our outdoor basketball courts, right? And we saw a little glimpse of that when the International Festival was shut down. So it's my hope that we have a great summer, that there's a reduction in crime this summer from the previous summer, and that we keep everything open. That's my hope. thanks for putting this together, and look forward to seeing how it turns out.
Thank you. Amazing work everybody's doing. I want to commend everyone that was mentioned, but I've been working a lot with our Parks and Rec department, and great hire with Wyatt Woody. Again, not trying to say anybody else is not great. You all are all doing a wonderful job. Dr. Jennings, you're amazing. But he really has just taken this on really by the storm and done a wonderful job just jumping in. The Hill City Hoops things is great. Working with Lacey with the flag football program coming up. Yeah, there is a lot of basketball going on, but there's also some other great programs as well. But even with, the pool opening up and a lot of great stuff for our kids this summer. And again, making sure that they're fed is, number one, but fun, safe things for them to do all summer long, places for them to go. I want to make sure that our parents and the families are making sure that they take advantage of this online or going to the different locations you mentioned to find it, so they know that there are places their kids can go, and a lot of it's either free or low cost to them, so that the kids are busy and have places to be aside from home, and that there's a lot of fun stuff that the city has put together for them. So thank you again. I know you put a lot of hard work into this, so thanks so much for a wonderful presentation. Appreciate it. Anyone else? Okay. All right, moving on to our, someone else? No?
Go ahead.
You sure?
Go ahead. I'm good.
Okay. On to our business item briefings. Fiscal year 2025, program year 2024 Community Development Advisory Committee, or CDAC. Recommendations for Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, and Home Program Entitlement Funds. This item will appear before council for action on June 11th, 2024. Ms. Melva Walker.
Good afternoon, Mayor Reed, Vice Mayor Feraldi, and members of council. City staff has accepted the applications for the fiscal year 2025 Community Development Block Grant and Home Program. HUD provides these funds, and they have provided the final entitlement amounts for Lynchburg. The Community Development Advisory Committee met on February 22nd and reviewed the submitted CDBG and home program applications and formulated the recommendations for consideration by City Council. These recommendations have been provided to you. This screen is the CDBG funds, and this one is the home funds. A public hearing will be conducted on June 11th, and a final approval and allocation of the project funds will be completed at that time to be incorporated into the program year 2024 annual action plan that is submitted to HUD.
Thank you very much. Any questions from anyone or comments? Dr. Wilder?
Yes, just thank you, Ms. Walker, for the work in the committee. I'm not on the committee this year, but I appreciate all the hard work your staff, this whole team does. This is to me, one of the greatest programs we have in our city, because there's always such a need for more housing for our community and all the support services. I went to a luncheon last week for Miriam's house, and just the testimonials from the persons. I mean, they had two great testimonials, and one of the young ladies, who had gone through Miriam's house, her son is a senior at East Glass, has like a full scholarship to one of the football scholarship to one of our colleges in the Topwood area. It just shows how those seeds planted back then have really matured now, but this young man is doing like an amazing young man, a 3.4 GPA. But those seeds that they sowed in those kids' lives, those families' lives, has really transformed into great success stories. So just the work that we're doing for stable housing is so crucial. So thank you for the work your community does in our community. It really shows our community a community of love and a community of care. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Anyone else? Councilman Hungerson?
Ms. Walker, you have on here for CDBG just $20 reprogrammed from the previous year. So, I mean, apparently the spending down is actually working. I mean, people are using the money, and I know every year when I was on this committee, it seemed like there was lots of money that was reprogrammed from previous years and whatnot. Hard to see, just $20. So that's not a typo, huh? That's not a typo where it says $20?
That is entitlement money from a prior year.
Yeah,
It
but
was-
$20
Right,
as
right.
opposed to like 200,000 or whatever
Right.
those numbers used to be. Okay, good deal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, moving on. fiscal year 2025 school funding update and tax rates. This item will appear before council for action later this evening during our regular meeting. Ms. Donna Witt.
Got me a little skinny there. Okay, so Groundhog Day. So the school count tool, the new one for the adopted budget is not available still as of today. The assumption is the final distribution of funds will resemble the March calc tool with an ADM of $7,376. So, I'm sorry, ADM of students, 7,376. And if you compare the lump sum that was in the March calc tool and the lump sum that came out in the adopted budget, we don't have the breakdown yet, but it's about $200,000 less in the adopted budget than the March calc tool. So these numbers are probably as good as it's going to get, because that overall number, we can't see the breakdown yet, but the overall number is about $200,000 less. So if you look at this with the March calc tool, just kind of walking through these numbers, this is an ADM of 7,376 compared to the 25 proposed budget. So there is an additional $393,000 in sales tax. There is a reduction of $2.3 million in SOQ programs. There's $7.8 million in increase in incentive programs and $497,000 in lottery-funded programs. So what would be best case scenario, projected additional state revenue of $6.4 million. So breaking this down, so the $6.43 million is your projected additional state funding. The school's number for $3.2 million to keep T.C. Miller and Sandusky Elementary Schools are non-closure funds. And then to do the 3% increase for all school staff is about $2.57 million. So if you pull the T.C. Miller, the non-closure money, and the 3% increase out of that $6.43 million, you've got about $660,000. Now, the one thing to keep in mind is there's $1.15 million in state funding in that 6.43 that's dedicated to a teacher pay increase. Schools has to certify that they give that increase or they don't receive that 1.15 million. So that's just something you need to keep in mind. So there was a question about where the funds came from for the 3.2 million. Council looked at the difference in the ADM between where schools thought they would be and what was on the state calc tool, and that was about 1.6 million additional. And then council voted to put the 1.6 million general fund reserve for schools non-closure. And remember, that came from the White Rock project, and we moved it into a reserve should the schools need it. If they do get the $6.4 million, that 1.6 million would be at council's discretion of what they did with those funds. It could move back to the capital fund and either go back to White Rock or another project, council's discretion. And then there was a question, I think Councilman Helgeson asked for what the 2025 tax rates were. And so here's, you should have gotten this in an email as well, I hope, that to know what an increment change would result in a revenue value. And that was the information that was requested. So I think there was also a question on additional funds that schools would get and why that would not go directly to schools. There's about $2 million, $2.5 million that comes in as state funding, but it's either dedicated revenue or it's funds that the schools are fiscal agent for that has to be like passed through, like we get passed through grants. They get passed on to other organizations like the Governor's School and the Detention Home and the Child Development Clinic. And then the cafeteria funds are not included in the budget. So that just kind of gives you a breakdown of what that additional funding is and why it's not reflected as true additional revenue in the budget for schools' operating funds. And happy to answer questions if I can.
Councilman Helgeson?
Donna, if you can go back a couple slides, I guess. On ours, it's 50 out of 81. One more. There you go. So when I'm looking at what we have in the budget, our budget book for 2025, it shows that the state revenue is estimated at 67.2 million. With that, the new numbers, and now it looks like you're having a 73, 67, or 76 ADM. That is somewhere around 76.3 if you million. So going from 67.2 million in the book versus 76.3 adjusting, that's a $9.1 million delta.
But that takes in consideration the grant funds that are dedicated or they're the fiscal agent for. So that's that other
So the extra 2 million or so?
2.5 million.
Okay.
That's that slide I just showed you. Those
Okay.
funds are not available for the school's operating fund.
So even though it's going up, the state projected additional state funding is up 9.1 million. 2 million of it, or whatever.
2.5.
2.5 is accounted for already.
Yeah.
So now we're still at a fairly good, amount, but even at that, we have the ability to actually lower the burden either on our citizens, our taxpayers. We talked in Finance Committee today with a lot of increase in revenue based on the interest income that we're earning. This is annual operating revenue. The 3.2 million, which I'm glad you clarified to some that didn't understand where it came from, that was the 1.6 million with the extra ADM over budget or over what they projected versus one-time money that was set aside. So this money, the state money, is annual operating money. Obviously the state can change their budget like they do, but it's a biennial budget, so it's for 2 years. So this looks like it's operating money. And we've counted that the 3.2 million in two different buckets, the 1.6 with the extra membership, the ADM, and the 1.6 as a one-time. So to me, it's easy. I think we're at the 660 right there, which you show, which is extra revenue that we could lower. And so based on the charts that you have here, that means we could lower our car taxes even with that number, with that conservative number of 10 cents, right? I think you had on the sheet, you had that our tax rates are for personal property at 10 cents a piece, or 10-cent increments is 644,000. And it looks like we could lower, if we wanted to do just the bare minimum, we could lower personal property tax by that rate by 10 cents.
By 10 cents, personal property would equate to a $13 savings based on a vehicle valued at $20,000.
Yep.
It also would equate to just under a penny on real estate, which would equate to about $20 savings on a home valued at $200,000.
Okay. So we could do either one of those probably fairly easily, just with this extra funding. And so hopefully we can kind of wrestle through that. I think we could go more because I think some of these other numbers, I'm glad to see that the schools, glad to see our chairman here. It's been interesting to watch, and being part of the budget for many years, we got a $109 million budget that's going to now go up quite substantially if we just take the state money and spend it. So I'm glad that we're at least looking at this and thinking about it, because I know the governor, in his budget proposal, he recognized the surplus and he said, let's give money back to taxpayers. Sadly, the Democrats in Richmond said we're going to spend it all, and I hope we don't do the same thing like the Democrats in Richmond did by spending it all, when we have good opportunities to at least lower some tax burden on our citizens. I think there's plenty of other room, knowing what we talked about today in Finance Committee with regarding the underestimation of the investment income that is coming. Other things, if we tighten the belt and don't just, spend, I think we can lower that burden even more so. But when we looked at the budget, and when the budget was rolled out, our city manager presented to council what he thought was a good budget. That showed about $109 million in operating expenses between the state and the city. The state's really ponied up because they didn't give the tax rebates. Now that means, I think, we can give less, and it still is more than they anticipated in this budget. Sadly, lots of times when budgets are coming out, they typically use, the thing that costs the least, but yet has the biggest impact. For years, I'm glad you guys haven't done this. Anytime we looked at and talked about tax reductions, the first thing was to go, the school crossing guard. And everybody kind of rolls their eyes and says, okay, we've seen that trick before. Enough of that stuff. Don't take the thing that everybody's happy about. I've seen the same thing, sadly, in school funding, that I've heard from lots of teachers that said they haven't got funding for pencils and Kleenexes. But you got $109 million to educate 7,300 kids. That means the allocation of those enormous amount of resources have to be better utilized. I think there's lots of things. One administrative personnel could take care of pencils and Kleenexes for the next 10 years, a budget, So I appreciate this, Donna. One thing on here that you have in the presentation for the budget is, page 185. There's about a 20% increase in administration from last year's allocation.
I can explain that. So Councilmember Mischins read from the ACFR those numbers.
Read from the what?
The administration enrollment numbers and those that were in the ACFR, the 2023 fiscal year audit. You remember that? Yep, remember that? So
That's what he's talking about there.
we asked schools to clarify those numbers, and they did let us know that the ones that they provided that are in the annual comprehensive report are incorrect, and we corrected them in the budget book. So what's in the budget book is from schools, and it is corrected from year end.
So what we did is we adopted 7.7 million in 2024. This projection for 2025 is a 20% increase on administration on the line items for schools. Is that the same thing you're talking about, or what I'm talking about on page 185? So it went from what
Can I
we
look at your
adopted,
book?
yep.
I'm sorry.
What we adopted last year was 7
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the actual
The CAFR?
breakdown for the schools numbers for enrollment by grade, and
Oh,
then
yeah,
how
no,
many were in administration?
Nope. So this amount going from 7 million to the 3 million, which is about a 20% increase in administration. We've heard from a lot of the school people that have came and said, save the schools, cut the administration.
I believe
I
this
agree
is
with that.
because of the health numbers, their increase in their insurance claims. I'd have to verify that, but this is administration and health. So I think that's where probably some of their increase is for their health claims.
Because the extra,
If you know.
okay. And we have the extra $1 million that went for health claims.
Yeah.
That's separate though from
Right.
this.
But, and I apologize for confusing you all. I thought you were talking about numbers of by grade and in administration and teachers, so I apologize.
Because a few lines, just a few lines above it though, there's an extra $1 million as well for the health insurance reserves. So that can't be that.
Well, that's the revenue coming in. And then the other would be there where your expenditure going out is in your administration and health. So that $1 million is coming in from revenue from the city from that health insurance claim that they held in reserve on our books.
So then it's going up 500,000 as opposed to 1.5 million? So anyway, it'd be nice to know what that is. I know it's, because this, maybe
Yeah,
some,
I mean, that's very much a question we're gonna have to ask schools.
okay.
Because I'm
We don't have
because we
that-
get
don't have
that, we get
breakdown.
those
We can
numbers from
suppose,
them.
for a while, but we just don't have the numbers.
So of this $1.5 million increase, the off-the-cuff thought is that at least $1 million of it is because the city taxpayers are putting in an extra $1 million for the health insurance reserves.
Well, it came from previous year's return of fund balance that they asked we put in a reserve in case they did have a claims year. But I believe your increase is even more than that. But I'd have to verify with Sonia.
Okay.
Vice Mayor
Thank you.
Giraldi?
Madam Mayor,
He was waiting for me.
I would ask if he would be willing, is the council member making a proposal for a policy for us to consider? And if he could speak directly to what that would be helpful as we're working through this.
Are you making a proposal?
To what did he say? Sorry.
Policy proposal?
If he's making a proposal, Madam Mayor, I'd ask if he'd be willing to speak more directly what the proposal would be, because I was having a hard time following.
Okay, so more directly, as we have C up there, $660,000 increase, even after taking all the other expenses and then now even moving the 1.6 million that came separately, now all of it being in the school funding numbers. That means that we have 666,000 more. That means we can lower the real estate tax rate by a penny. Or that means we can lower the car taxes by 10 cents. Whichever council would prefer, I would be happy for both of those as a bare minimum. I think we can do other things more than that because of what we talked about in Finance Committee with other revenue that's coming in. But specifically to this item with regarding school funding, this means that we can take the 29 million, where is it here? The 39,360,000 and lower that by the increased additional funds that are coming by the state off of our local taxpayers, and then give back a tax, lower the tax rate in the upcoming budget by either the 1 penny in the real estate tax or 10 cents on the car tax. Does that make sense?
Madam Mayor, I'd have one more question, if the councilman would be willing to respond.
Absolutely.
Do we know for certain these are the numbers?
We absolutely don't know they're for certain,
Thank you, Madam Mayor.
They
I
are-
have, I would.
but they're absolutely, what they are is based on the calc tools, and you understand, because what changes
Madam
is the actual number of employees.
Okay.
I mean, excuse me, ADM.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
So we don't know if this is the situation. We don't know if these are the dollars that are going to break down. And then $660,000, Ms. Witt, if you wouldn't mind going to that end slide, which may potentially, we're not guaranteed, we don't know, if we went at the car tax, lowering that rate would save you less dollars, or not enough dollars to even buy what we also talked about at Finance Committee, to not even buy a meal at McDonald's.
I would just caveat a little bit. We know that the gross number that came out in the March count tool as opposed to what was adopted is $200,000 less. So these numbers could be off, could be reduced by as much as 200,000.
Sure.
So the 660 could be 460.
So now we're talking at $9, which at this point, you can't even buy a Happy Meal. If the premise of the argument is what costs the least and has the biggest impact, if $9 means the teachers at Sandusky Elementary School, who Councilmember Helgeson voted against keeping the school open just a week and a half ago, if they get paid more, that's worth a Happy Meal for me.
So since I was mentioned, I'd like to
well-
reply.
Councilman Missions?
Well, I mean, I'd be happy to have Councilmember Helgeson reply if you'd like to do that.
Well, I'd like to call on you. So, Councilman Missions?
So the question that I have is, we've got the budget book, we've got what's been presented here, right? But then we've got the resolution for tonight. And that's what we really should be talking about, because those are the numbers we're actually voting on. So my question is why is the resolution not changed? No, I'm asking the financial officer, Vice Mayor. I'd appreciate it if you would let me have the floor and let me have the conversation with our CFO.
Be a jerk about it, sure. I'm just going to give you the answer. It's not a financial consideration. It was a resolution safeguarding funds. It's not appropriating money. That's why. It's a one-time vote.
Talked about different
No, I'm
things.
asking you, why is the resolution the same as it was in the last meeting? If we have new information, right, the information that's been presented here, then why is the resolution the same, showing the same amount of income coming in for the schools?
In working with the superintendent, she presented that this was the actual, what was decided upon by their school board, and she had not presented anything different to them, so that she wasn't comfortable giving us new numbers for that resolution. So what would happen is.
That's what I'm asking specifically
Yes,
about the school's
correct.
income.
That's correct. What she wanted us, council, to vote on and to be included in that resolution was what the school board had agreed to.
And bottom line, we still don't have the calculation, so we still don't have the exact numbers. The resolution that is in the packet for this evening is the worst-case scenario, funding scenario. The numbers we're reviewing today are the best-case scenario, funding scenario. So in a lot of ways, the safest thing to do is, if council's going to consider that resolution, and it is it takes two readings. You open with the worst-case scenario. We do expect the calc tool, we've been in touch with VDOE, to be out either late this week or next week. And then we can make adjustments that would only be beneficial to all parties before the second reading. If we were to adopt the most optimistic numbers, then we've got to come back and make less beneficial adjustments to the numbers.
So when I look at this, the question that I have is, why are we increasing the administration category, administration, attendance, and health category, by about 167, $350,000 from what was adopted last year?
What's in the proposed budget is what we received from schools. And then I believe that's why you'll see that negative contingency there of $8.1 million, was to make the math work with the less local operating.
So what less local operating is presented in this? There's no less local operating presented on this resolution.
Well, just the 39 million, what was actually submitted from the schools was 47.5 million.
So flat local operating from last year.
Well, it's lower than what they submitted. That's what I'm saying.
Than what they asked for.
So
right?
yes, correct,
I'm
submitted.
comparing it to what we spent last year. This is.
That's correct. This
Yeah,
is
I want to make it very crystal clear that what is being proposed as it stands right now is flat local funding, because I've heard a lot. I've heard from school administrators, I've heard from teachers, I've heard from parents about the propaganda that's trying to be spewed by some people sitting up on this dais tonight in public comment. And what's currently proposed in this budget is flat local funding from last year, the same as we did. My question is why is there an increase in the administration attendance and health line item over what was adopted last year? Because personally, we should be continuing to reduce Lynchburg City Schools administration. And any increase to administration should be coming out of that and going into instruction. Because I also found out today that they're prematurely, for whatever reason I don't know, cutting frontline positions in schools that aren't even being considered. So the concern that I have here, right, is that we're seeing, a little extra $350,000 here getting pumped into administration. What are they going to do with that? Last year when we cut administration, there were some benefits that came out of that. We got rid of a useless equity department in Lynchburg City Schools that did nothing for academics, zero, right? So I want to know, why are we giving administration, attendance, and health more? Why are we not keeping that flat also? That additional 350 or some odd thousand should be going into instruction. We should be flat funding administration at best, and we should be putting the resources into the classrooms, just like we did last year. Does that make sense?
I believe it's the same question as Councilman Helgeson had, that I need to find out from schools. I believe it's the health portion that might be those health claims, but I don't know that for sure.
So
I need to clarify that.
Yeah, and that's the question that I have about that. The other information that was presented, I think going back to what Councilmember Helgeson asked previously, Jeff, if you take a look at the actual resolution that's presented, it's only about a little less than 8.2 million that's going into administration, not the 9 that was in the proposed budget, the 9.2. Now, another question that I have about that is, and I think you may have spoken to this a little bit, Mr. Patrick, but so if we were to pass the resolution as is tonight, right? What happens when we find out it's 6, 7, 8, whatever million more it ends up being coming from the state?
We'll be able to bring the real numbers to you for the second reading, once we know what those numbers are from the state. And
Okay.
we'll ask the schools to break it down by category.
And then, is that, well, from a legal standpoint, if it changes going from one reading to the next, is that acceptable, or is that?
Yes, so what we've done in the past is that has been the city's practice. So if the numbers change or you all choose to change the numbers, what you're doing on your first reading is an introduction before the adoption. So it's common practice, I think, for the city to do something like that. Now, if it was a completely different fund or a fully different change versus monies related to the appropriation that was previously introduced, that'd be something different. But since it's the same subject and only a modification by council after introduction, I think you're okay.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested to see what the actual numbers end up being, and then combining all of that information and seeing what we can adjust on that second reading to provide relief to our citizens.
Councilman Helgeson?
Thank you. I guess a couple things. If you can back up a couple slides, Ms. Witt. Right there. Oh, sorry, one more forward. This one right there. So I think what I know Chris has said that, you voted against putting up the reserve. To me, as I read this, what you're just seeing is that reserve, as you presented earlier, was most likely not needed because of the fact that we have all this extra money. We didn't just have 1.6 million more from the state because of a higher ADM. We also have so much more that we don't even need to vote to put that extra 1.6 million in the reserve, even though we still could, but it doesn't look as though the schools would need that if that was the entire goal of keeping those two schools open. And which clearly shows exactly what I said 2 weeks ago. That's why I voted to table the motion, because it was not necessary, but I know some people like to spin it. Secondly, the budget item that I heard from Chris that said, oh, well, do we know exactly how much this money is going to be? Since we don't know exactly how much its money is going to be, I won't be voting for it or for lowering the burden. Today at Finance Committee, we had budgeted $1.9 million in interest income. Later, we're closer to $7 million by the end of the year. Next year, we budgeted about $3 million for interest income. This year, it may be closer to 6 or 7, depending upon how much we spend. So do we know exactly how much, in any budget item, any line, do we know exactly 12 months in advance, exactly how much that line's going to be? Do you ever present a budget to us saying, oh, since we don't know exactly how much it's going to be down to the penny, I can't vote for it? Or is that kind of how budgets work?
That's how budgets work.
That's why tonight, or a little bit later today in our business item briefings, we're going to talk about some third quarter adjustments. Those adjustments happen when more revenue comes in than anticipated, or a new unexpected scanning machine that is needed by the voter registrar is needed, or something where we make those adjustments. So, but at least when we're coming right out of the gate, we should at least try to be close. And so that's why I think tonight, when we vote on this motion, that's why I'm going to still say the question that was posed to the General Assembly is the same question that's posed to us. What do we think? Do we want to give back some tax relief, or do we want to just spend the money? I think our citizens would appreciate any tax relief, even if it's small. I would like to see it bigger. If we didn't spend money on every project, we could probably give back more. But at least we have an option. We have the ability to lower the car taxes, lower the real estate taxes. We have that option. The question is, do we want to spend the money, or do we want to return it back to our surpluses, return it back to our taxpayers? I'm pushing, and I would appreciate if we could vote to give something back to our taxpayers. Thank you.
Dr. Wilder, go ahead.
Thank you for the information. It's greatly helpful and I appreciate it. Just how we go through all the numbers. I know things will continue to change, but thank you. At some point, we have to pass our budget. So it'll be finalized after June or whatever, July. So we're thankful for where we are today. In our budget, we did provide some tax relief for our citizens. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Council voted to waive the $10 trash pickup fee for the year, and also not to charge a vehicle license fee for this year, for 25 as well.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
$10 a month.
Right, oh, yes, it is, $10 a month.
Yes, thank you. So we already had provided some tax relief. And I remember when we were going through our budget session about what to fund, and some things we could fund and some things we could not fund. Like it was a toolkit from the housing department, or something, like a toolkit for black property we could not do. And I really was in favor of that project, so I'm sorry we couldn't do that. So there's so many other items that would benefit our citizens and benefit our community that we could do, that we just don't have the financial resource to do that at this time. So again, we are trying to be prudent with the funds. There's certain things that the city does continue to need, we just are not currently funding. Again, I'll go back to this slide we did 2 or 3 years ago in the city council work session that showed all the millions and millions of dollars of capital projects that are needed for our city, but some funds we just can't do, and we do it based on a priority basis. So again, make sure persons understand there are so many millions of dollars of projects we need to do, we're just not able to do financially at this moment. So thank you for the information, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
I would like to make a comment, because I haven't spoken yet. The word exact or exacts was mentioned. So I want to say some things about exacts. Last year, we gave $39 million to the school. Is that correct? So that was levelized funding from 2022, correct? We went levelized to 2022.
Yes, I believe so.
So
It was a, 24 was a reduction of 23.
Correct, but I think we matched 22.
Which matched 22?
I think so.
All right, so if anybody out there wants to double check me, because I know that I get double checked and fact checked all the time, you can pull up any inflationary calculator in your phone right now. $39 million from 2022 in today's economy is approximately $41,784,225. $41,784,225. So that is what the $39 million costs today. So when we gave and offered $39 million today, that is not level funding. We should have adjusted it. So 39 that we gave last year from 2022 that we've given again this year that we've said is level, which was based on last year's number, which was levelized. If we're talking exacts, is not level because we were using the 22 number last year. So we should have adjusted that by almost $2.8 million. So we've shortchanged the schools by that number. Another exact. The schools asked us for $139 million in CIP money this year for the next 5 years in projects that they deemed necessary for the upkeep on buildings they reside in that the city owns, but they're responsible for maintaining, which is one of the reasons that Sandusky Elementary will be closing in 2025 because of the horrendous shape that it's in, because of the lack of the ability to be maintained. Do you know how much money, everyone, that the schools received of that $139 million request? $9 million. There's an exact for you. So I've already outlined that they were over $2 million short on what levelized should be because of inflationary costs. They're $130 million short of their CIP requests to maintain their buildings for the next 5 years. And a few of us are constantly reminded of our campaign promises, so let's go there for a second and we talk about exacts. So a few of us campaigned on public safety, education, and the economy. Last year's budget, we invested historically in public safety by making record investments in recruitment and retention efforts, which involved pay raises, significant ones. We've made investments in the workforce in Lynchburg and investments in investing in the city. We've also lowered taxes and given credits this year and last year. So that's economy. Yet last year, we reduced the local amount that we gave to schools. And this year, we're talking about it again. And I'll remind you once again that we have not considered inflationary costs in the amount we've offered. And we're going to take $660,000 and say that just slightly over $1 a month is worth taking that from the schools when I've just outlined that they have $9 million of a $139 million request to take care of their schools, their buildings over the next 5 years. They're short $2.5 to $8 million based on inflationary costs to do the same exact things. When we just talked about the cost of Chick-fil-A and a Happy Meal, they're expected to do more with less money for the children that we all support, whether we have children in the city schools or not. One of our council members totally disregarded that teachers pay money out of their pockets all the time and have the entire time I've had children in schools. They pay for school supplies. They pay for snacks. They pay for children's clothes out of their own pockets because budgets have always been tight for public schools. So every citizen, every taxpayer in this city pays towards our schools, and then teachers pay for the difference out of their pockets. And we're going to say, let's take this $660,000 that's left so that the taxpayers can save over $1 a month. And that the governor would say, yes, do that. After he just made it clear that education is and was his priority from the time he campaigned until now, and made it and doubled down by increasing the amount that he's offered to schools across the state. And had a whole article recently about education being the bedrock of the American dream, and how every child throughout the Commonwealth deserves a choice for a hopeful future. And we're going to take $660,000 away. And we don't believe there's a place that that can go in these schools, in buildings that are leaking and have mold problems and need so many repairs. So there's some exacts for you. I'm sure it's going to be debated. I'm sure we'll hear all kinds of things, but there's some exacts. Go ahead, Councilman Mischens.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I can appreciate the passionate emotion in that plea. It was also clearly lacking in a little bit of logical analysis and what actually occurred in the budget last year. And when you look at it, we actually, as proposed right now in the resolution, we're going to be 8% ahead in instruction than we were the year before, right? So that's the reality. Because if you look at what was adopted, or excuse me, the actual in FY23, it was $70.5 million, and we're looking at giving 76.1 million, I think is what we have in this ordinance, right, or the resolution right here. That's right. So that's about 8% ahead, not factoring in inflation, but 8% ahead of where we were 2 years ago. So we're putting money where it matters, and that's what we should be doing when we're being responsible. We should be putting money where it matters, and not just looking at, you know, a piece here and a piece there. Now, I get it, right? When you are used to military pay scales, for instance, right? Because I retired from the Coast Guard. I know what that's like. Same thing, VA disability, things like that. And those income streams coming in, they get adjusted for the cost of living every year. Well, the reality is our citizens don't get that same benefit, right? They don't get those benefits. They don't automatically get cost of living adjustments or inflation adjustments in their pay. They certainly get inflation adjustments in what they spend. It is a silent tax. And when you combine that with high interest rates and stagflation, which is where we're headed, it is absolutely brutal on them. So who am I to sit here and say that $12 or that $20 doesn't make a difference? That's not me, because that's not, it's not my money. All of this, none of this is our money. It's not the school's money. The money belongs to the citizens, and they're the ones that are getting impacted the most right now. They're getting hit the hardest with the inflation and the interest. So when I think about this, and you know, and we're not voting on anything right now, so I don't think I need to do my disclaimer or about my wife being a school teacher. There's obviously impacts in what we're considering here. My kids go to Lynchburg City Schools. I don't think the mayor ever put her kids in Lynchburg City Schools. Has anybody asked her why? Right? She didn't. So my kids are in Lynchburg City Schools. And, you know, it's interesting just hearing these arguments, and it's just always a constant spew of we're going to say this or we're going to say that, but the reality is we need to be investing in instruction, right? We have too many empty seats in classrooms, period. That's why we're closing schools. The school board is charged to do that. They're charged to find efficiencies and to act on them, right? Their choice. They're doing it. We need to support them in that decision, right? And when we get the inefficient expense of these empty seats out and we increase the utilization of what we have available, right, it's going to free up more resources. It's just how it works. You know, as far as the ask versus the give, so to speak, Ms. Witt, is it normally the practice that schools asks for more than city council gives them?
Depends on the year,
Last 5 years?
probably.
Yeah. Is it the same way with the capital asks?
Typically, their return of fund balance has paid for a lot of the maintenance. I think we've funded almost all of it in the past until they started the request to close schools to renovate others.
And this is something different, new, and extraordinary, right? That we're closing. When's the last time we closed a school? Have we closed a school since you've been here?
Not, seems like there was one. small close.
2003, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would not know, I couldn't tell you.
Earlier than that? I know that there's a man in the back of the room that knows the answer to that question. Kaiser?
I was say there was one that closed, but I couldn't name it or tell you when.
It's been a long time, but it's part of the process. It's part of what needs to happen. And the tremendous inefficiency that we have right now without doing the redistricting or rezoning plans yet, where we've got a school, in some cases, that have 4 or 5 different school zones across the city. We've got buses passing buses, you know, but they're doing a shifting schedule next year to help that's going to, I think, promote some efficiency and that. You know, it hasn't been the most appealing process to watch in our school board meetings, right? But they're getting there. They're getting there and they're getting it done because it's just what we have to do. I mean, I just find it interesting also that the mayor put out this, you know, kind of saying, this is why we have to close schools. Yet just a couple weeks ago on the radio, she said that we got to close those schools after next year. So which one is it? I mean, which one is it? And you know, it's just very interesting to watch the emotional, passionate arguments to push a certain thing a certain direction. I wish I knew why. I wish I knew what the motivation was behind it. But my motivation is simple. It's our citizens, right? Right now they're hurting. They're suffering under this horrible economy perpetuated by horrible Democrat policies from Washington. And if we can offer a little bit of relief, which is what our governor tried to do, we need to do it because taxes are too high. And that's where I am. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Feraldi?
Mr. Manager, I have your dollar. So you have my dollar for the next year. I think we should move on. This is a preposterous notion that $1 is lasting tax savings in the upcoming year. And it's incredibly disingenuous to take a photo op on this dais and then tell the school board we must support them in closing Sandusky Elementary School. I would respectfully ask that we move on.
I do have a question. So we're having this discussion, but there's not anything, I mean, we're voting on our budget. We've already voted the first round on a budget that has our current real estate rate, our current, all of our current rates. We have no we're supposed to do our second vote tonight. So unless there's a consensus up here to have further discussion on taxes later on, I feel like this is kind of a moot point. I mean, am I right? Matt, can you interject here?
Yes, so what it sounds like is staff is probably needing guidance as to how to proceed with the budget. So if there's a majority that is interested in doing what Councilmember Helgeson has proposed, now is the time to informally state that.
Right, because if there was an interest by a majority to adjust the tax rate, we'd have to start from ground zero with this entire budget.
That's right, we would have to make adjustments to the paperwork.
Insults the intelligence of our staff. I think they can handle it.
I'm not insulting the intelligence, I'm also respecting the amount of work that's been done, and that this has not been brought up until now. So with that said, is there a consensus beyond Councilman Missions and Councilman Helgeson to pursue a conversation with adjusting any of the tax rates? Nope. Vice Mayor? Okay, then moving on. The fiscal year 2024 third quarter adjustments.
You want me to pay for yours too?
Okay, third quarter adjustments. Let me regroup here. Thank you, sir. Okay, so we have quite the list this year. We're a little late in coming to you with our third quarter adjustments, just due to work on the budget and other things. So as things kind of came up, we tucked them in here. So I'm gonna walk through these, but there's really 5 themes here. We're appropriating additional dedicated revenue in the general fund. We will be using the reserve for contingency for additional funding needs to support that additional revenue and other requests. We need to true up some of our grant funds. We need to appropriate additional revenue that has come in for the capital fund, mostly some VDOT funding. And then there's some additional revenues in the other funds that we need to look at. So I will walk through these. So as far as our additional general fund dedicated revenue, which means it has to be used for what it came in for. So in December of 2023, there was a 2% state increase for constitutional officers that was adopted by the General Assembly. So that's not included in our budget, which means the state portion comes in of $95,485. The local match is $30,782. And this would be for Commissioner of the Revenue, Treasurer, Commonwealth's Attorney, Sheriff, and Clerk of Courts. Human Services, in Social Services, we have additional subsidy that's mandated maintenance payments of $234,500, child welfare of $17,172. There is a local match of $3,150. Our family partnership meetings, additional revenue is $18,600. Our family preservation revenue increased by $3,518, which requires a local match of $645. Foster care, additional dedicated revenue of $50,100. Fostering futures of $4,000. And Medicaid renewals due to disbanding the public health emergency of $75,000. Our VIEW program got $129,886 with a local match of $23,825. And there were pay structure adjustments in social services. That's part of our dedicated revenue of $242,798. Good?
Okay.
Okay, additional general fund dedicated revenue, this is a little bit more. In the library, this is additional state aid from the Library of Virginia of $35,515. Police additional $599 revenue, which we're adding to the Public Safety Building Reserve to help pay for our FF&E of $519,000. And then the registrar and electoral board funds for the presidential primary of $66,490. So additional general fund use of reserve for contingencies, the Regional Juvenile Detention Center per diem due to increased usage. We had a report at Finance Committee for quarterly report. There's 61% of the children there are Lynchburg kids, so it's requiring additional $512,159. The Children's Services Act's contribution expenditures above the state revenues we received of $275,000. The registrar to purchase new ballot scanning equipment of $143,200. And then there's a transfer from the general fund operating budget to city, federal, state aid for social services grants, both the Safe and Stable Families and also the foster parent recruiting and training. And then the police, there was an emergency communications grant appropriated that was not covered by the grant, so we're transferring $29,629 to cover that. In our general fund use of reserves, we have a peer reserve that has $13,000 of additional revenues to be appropriated. And then schools made a request, and we just coupled it in with third quarter adjustments instead of bringing it separately. They have a textbook reserve that sits on the general fund that was funded by return of fund balance over, I don't know, a long time ago, but it's been sitting there for a while, and they're asking to use that to appropriate funds to purchase Virginia Department of Education approved textbooks of $1,821,246. But again, that's sitting in a reserve on the city's book. General fund transfer of one-time funds. So I made a mistake. So when we did the 12th Street stabilization project, we appropriated those funds in the general fund, and they should have been appropriated to the capital fund where we actually paid that money out of. So this is just correcting an accounting error for $2,455,000. We just put it in the wrong fund, so I need to get it to the capital fund. In other funds, in city, federal, state aids, in your agenda summary, you'll see a list of grants that we're truing up. So we're either increasing or reducing those based on our final grant appropriation. In the forfeited assets fund, we are appropriating some of those funds received for the police department. In the Children's Services Act fund, you'll see that additional revenue that was appropriated. And then also the other side for the general Regional Juvenile Detention Fund. In the city capital projects funds, there is some addition to projects and then some rescinding of funds for projects. Most of that is what's been awarded by VDOT. They've changed their rules that if they gave us revenue share for a project and we didn't use it all, it used to be we could move it to another approved project. We now cannot do that. So we're having to rescind some of those funds. And then in the airport operating fund, there's additional expenses for air service development efforts, personnel, and contractual services. And in the airport capital grant projects fund, there is additional funding for projects. Happy to answer any questions. That was a lot.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? Councilman Helgeson?
Donna, you said the 1.8 million for schools for textbook reserve, so this reserve has been sitting there. You know, it's interesting with our last discussion, we had 1.6 million sitting in a reserve that could actually been coupled with that 660 and actually lowered the taxes by 3 cents or the car taxes by 35 cents. This has been sitting in a reserve. This reserve for textbooks can easily be transferred to reserve for school closings or whatnot, I imagine, since it's a reserve that was allocated. I hadn't heard anything about textbooks, and the schools have had a lot of discussion about needing to scrimp every penny so they can keep schools open, so they can do lots of things. They've had the Chromebooks which I think supplanted lots of the actual textbooks. And now we're seeing an extra 1.8 million coming from this reserve that's been established a while ago, I get it, for textbooks. But the expenditure hasn't happened until now. Is there a reason, maybe time, why it is at this time?
I want to hear from the professional.
Ms. Whitley?
My understanding is they know these expenses come every so often when the Department of Education says we're upgrading books, and these are for K through 5. So they set this money aside in the return of fund balance over a number of years. It's been sitting there for a while until they're requested, because the Department of Education is updating textbooks. That's my understanding.
So the K-5 educators are actually getting trained this week on the new state-approved curriculum that is a textbook change. That's why the kids got out last week, but the teachers are all staying an extra week to get this training on this update. And it's because of a state change or the state adoption of a new curriculum.
Right, and I have seen the PO for this, so I know this is the cost that's going for textbooks. It won't be used for something else.
Now, we talked about this at the end of the Finance Committee. The reserve for contingencies, normally we've been able to kind of safeguard that. And there's been any third quarter adjustments or adjustments that are made typically out of unused funds. We talked already about the 5.1 million increase in the interest income for this year, projected for this year. Is there any way to use that rather than rating the reserve for contingencies?
We could. But I went back and looked after you said that, because I was like, man, it just seems like every year we use reserve for contingency. We didn't use reserve for contingency in 22 and 23. We didn't need to. But in almost every year before that, we used the reserve for contingency.
But it's
So,
normally.
but it depends on what pot you want to use, because we do have additional revenues that you could appropriate, those additional revenues, which means you're spending those. Or if you appropriate the reserve for contingency fund, you'll be using those. Whichever one you don't use will fall to fund balance.
It's just because the reserve for contingencies, normally, I think, when it's ever been used, it's been usually small numbers. This is almost 100% of, the reserve for contingency is 1.2 million. Just this one right here alone is a little over $1 million.
Well, in 2019, I think we used 835,000 of the reserve for contingency.
But since
So
then, we've
just
been able to, since I've been the chairman of the Finance Committee, we've been able to preserve it and not touch that reserve for contingencies, because it is it's an emergency kind of fund. And so, anyway, but I recognize that you can spend it out of your right pocket or left pocket, kind of like school funding. School funding comes out of your right pocket, the state of Virginia, left pocket out of the local city taxpayers. I understand how that works for the reserve for contingency versus the operating money. Now, that extra funds that are coming over and above the budgeted for the interest income, when will we see that? Normally, you presented today at the Finance Committee that there was already a fairly large increase over and above.
We're currently about $3 million above budget.
Above budget on interest income revenue to the city. And that's provided we keep the balance that's invested, that's ongoing revenue, which also could be another reduction in real estate taxes or car taxes, as we talked about before, so we don't minimize tax relief by waiving only one George Washington dollar bill. That could grow very sizably. So thank you.
Okay. Oh, it's Dr. Wilder?
Again, just thank you for the information. I really appreciate it. I have such an appreciation for you and your team. I have more of appreciation for you after going through all of that. So thank you for the presentation. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on. The citywide youth curfew, Police Chief Ryan Zudema.
All right, good afternoon, Madam Mayor, Mr. Vice Mayor, members of council. We're here to discuss a citywide youth curfew, recommendation to extend it through January 1st of 2025. As you know, it's set to sunset June 1st, which would be this Saturday. We've been collecting data since it was implemented last year, May 26th. As of about 9 days ago, we collected data, which is all the data you'll see is as of that date. We have 48 individuals who've been charged with violating that curfew. 46 of those have been juveniles. 2 of those have been adults. If you recall, there's a provision in the code section that says if the adults are not doing certain things, that they can be charged under this as well. To show you some data, and this is consistent with the presentation provided to you last 6 months, just so you can kind of see. We look at property crime first. On the first slide that you see here, you can see property crime is down across the board when we compare the same time frame, which would have been a year prior to the curfew going into place, and then basically from the implementation of the curfew last year through to about 9 days ago. Those are all double-digit decreases in property crime. And then in the bottom, you see property crime numbers compared to the 5-year average, with one exception of auto theft. You can see all those numbers are down. We had a couple of years prior where we had some real high numbers in auto theft that drove that. But as you can see in this slide, or sorry, in the statistics above, last year to this year, we are down about 36% in that category. When you look at violent crime data, which obviously is certainly a concern of ours as well, again, you can see with one exception, there's a slight increase in the rape category of 1.3%. All the other categories are down, again, double digits. And then that's comparing the previous year prior to the curfew to the most current years since the curfew. And then violent crime compared to the 5-year average, you can again see similar traits in those numbers as well. One number that is not on your slide, and I apologize, we weren't able to get it prior to print time, so to speak. When we look at numbers of juveniles that are victims or suspects in crime, right? Because if you recall, one of the reasons that we believe we need the curfew in place is not just to keep those who are out there doing bad things from doing bad things, but to also keep young men and women who are out there from being victimized by those other folks. So when we look at 5-year average, comparing suspects who are juveniles in crime to last year's data, last year's data being May 26th when the curfew was implemented until 9 days ago. The 5-year average was we would see 11 suspects involved in violent crime that are juveniles. And this past year we saw 21. So when you compare last year with the curfew to the 5-year average, there was about a 90% increase. And then when you look at victims of crime, same window, that 5-year average is about 45, and last year was 46, so roughly a 2% increase there. The good news is that when you look at those same numbers, comparing, again, the 1-year window prior to the curfew versus the window since the curfew, we're seeing flat numbers on suspects. So I would argue that implementation at curfew has helped continue or to keep those numbers from continuing to rise when we talk about suspects, both 21, both of those years. And then those juveniles who were victims of violent crime, again, the 1 year prior to the curfew being implemented versus now, we actually saw almost a 15% reduction, 14.8% reduction in juveniles being victims of violent crime from the year or window prior to the curfew until the curfew was actually implemented. So kind of summarizing, as you heard me say before, this tool is just that. It's another tool that allows our officers to address delinquent behavior. There's certainly a correlation that remains there. Again, I was cautious last time, and I'll say the same thing this time. It's not a causation. It is one of many things that is helping that we believe reduce crime. Stratified policing, as we've mentioned to you before, is a part of that. Overall, you can see from those numbers on the slides previous that property crime is down about 25% roughly compared to the same period in the previous year, specifically with larcenies from vehicles down 36%. Why do we highlight that? We know that juveniles are often involved in larcenies from vehicles, and we know that we've actually arrested an individual who was a juvenile who was heavily involved in that, as well as involved in some of our stolen vehicles. You look at violent crime, again, down about 17.1% compared to the same period previous year. And we know that the curfew has prevented at least one firearm-related crime where a juvenile had intended to come into the city to purchase a firearm but did not because of the curfew, and it's led to one recovered stolen vehicle and one seized firearm. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? No? Councilman Taylor?
We're going to do everything to keep that tool in your tool chest.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Councilman Missions?
How are we going to navigate this midnight basketball and the curfew?
So there's a provision in the curfew, and I'll defer to the city attorney, but if I correctly read it, Section B, which is on page 2 of the ordinance, sub 5, says a minor attending an activity sponsored by a school, religious, or civic organization, by a public organization or agency, or by another similar organization or entity, which activity is supervised by adults, and/or the minor is going to or returning from such activity without detour or stop. And I'll defer to the city attorney if my interpretation of that is inaccurate.
No, I think that's a good interpretation, and I would interpret it the same way. So as I understand it, what Councilmember Mischins refers to is a city event or a co-sponsored event with the city, and I think this fits squarely within like that, so long as the parents are agreeable to the children attending and having a good time. I don't see an issue unless there was something else the officers need to enforce.
Was there, I mean, what's your thought on it? 16 to 22-year-olds in the summertime in one location from 10 to midnight. What's your thought on that?
I think it's an outlet that keeps them from doing other things. I mean, the curfew is great for those that comply with it. As you can see, 48 times people didn't. Well, 48 times they were charged. I'm sure more than 48 times people didn't. But I think as long as it's properly supervised and looked at in that sense, that we need to have adults there making sure that folks are doing the right things, I think it could be a good opportunity for our youth to have an outlet other than some of the other things they may become involved in.
Got it. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Moving on to roll call. Dr. Wilder?
I do not have any items.
No? Okay. Councilwoman Dolan? Councilman Helgeson?
No items.
Councilman Mischins?
No items.
Councilman Taylor?
Nope.
Vice Mayor Faraldi?
Just that my wife and I are happily married, and that's not about to change. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Congratulations, that's great. Okay, well, I will say, first, yesterday, went to a wonderful Memorial Day celebration at the City Armory. That was really well done. And again, thank you to all of our brave men and women who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. Also, I was able to read to our sweet kiddos at Sandusky Elementary School right before the end of school. And shout out to Leland Melvin. If you are watching or you hear this message gets to you, those kiddos want you to come to the school next year. And because I had a child ask me if I knew any scientists, I said, I have met an astronaut, and they all were very excited. So I'm giving you a plug and putting some pressure on you, sir. Okay, and lastly, tonight we'll be highlighting the circuit court. The circuit court is the trial court with the broadest powers in Virginia. The court handles a myriad of cases, including felonies, appeals from the district court, and juvenile and domestic relations court, family matters such as divorce, adoption, child custody, and termination of parental rights, civil matters with claims of more than $4,500, and settles disputes involving wills and estates. Appeals from the aforementioned lower courts are heard de novo, meaning the cases are tried from the beginning as though there had been no prior trial. The circuit court is the only court where a person has a constitutional right to a jury trial. There are 120 circuit courts in Virginia, clustered into 31 judicial districts. Lynchburg is in the 24th judicial district, with the counties of Amherst, Bedford, Campbell, and Nelson. The Lynchburg Circuit Court has been in several locations on Court Street since 1805, and its current location, 900 Court Street, since 1955. The court hears approximately 2,500 criminal cases and 1,500 civil cases per year. The Lynchburg Circuit Court Clerk's Office is comprised of very talented staff of 13 full-time and 2 part-time deputy clerks. The office serves as the administrative arm of the Circuit Court and is entrusted with a broad range of responsibilities both in and out of the courtroom. Courtroom responsibilities include ensuring all proceedings are properly recorded, typing and processing orders and related documents issued by the court, ensuring adequate juror pools, docketing, and indexing judgments as determined by the court, and processing and collecting payments ordered by the court. Did you know this office records 800 to 1,200 land transactions within the city each year? They also issue 800 to 1,000 marriage licenses, process 1,100 to 1,200 applications for concealed handgun permits, and 400 to 600 passports. In addition, they process petitions for expungements, the restoration of firearm and driving privileges, name changes, and they administer oaths. The clerk's office also handles wills and estates since there are no probate courts in Virginia. And that is a lot of great information if you had any questions about what they do. And with that, we are recessed until 7 p.m.